He also allows divorce. And we don't kill witches anymore either. So we got to be careful with what God allows. Well, God told us we can eat whatever we want. That's right. He didn't say without consequence. He said, I'm not going to make it a law that you can't have these foods. But that's not the same as saying, eat to your heart's content. Eat all the pork rinds you want. I don't think he said that. He said, I'm going to pass the responsibility to you guys. I'm going to pass the responsibility to you guys. And no matter how hard we tried in the 70s and the 80s to teach the rest of humanity to eat whole grains and eat vegetarian, the Christians won. They said, God told us we could eat whatever we want, so it must be good. God told us we could get a divorce, so it must be good. God told us we could have a church, so it must be good. And of course people are going to say, well, you know, you really lumped in church with some bad stuff. Well, forgive me if the Bible says that the first time someone went to God and said, what do you think about us building you a temple? And he went, I don't think so. I would think that's big. I would think that's very big. In fact, let me put it another way. If I, Paisley Yankolovich, come to people and say, last night God visited me and told me to build a church of cedar for him, people would go, oh, okay, so now he hears God, and God's telling him to build something, and where's the money for that going to come from? Oh, I bet the next thing out of his mouth was, so if you people believe in God, you'll believe in me, and you'll give me money to build my cedar temple. It says in the Bible that God really did talk to the prophet. How many times have we heard men of God come and say, God told me it's time to build a church building? How many times have we heard that? How many times have we ever heard a man of God say, I was going to build a church building and God visited me at night and said, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. Homie, don't play. We don't hear that. We don't hear that. Now, I can tell you story after story about all the things God told me about what I am not allowed to own in this life. What I'm not allowed to do in His name in this life. I could. You know, I tell people God talks to me, and He does, and I can't help that. I think He talks to everybody, but I guess some of us listen. But I didn't know that was funny until I said it, but I am convinced, because of the timing of when it happens in the Bible and what has happened before, that in the beginning, meaning the first time the subject was broached, God said it was a bad idea to build a temple. So, if the only Bible I had, because I lived in parts of China where you have to memorize one chapter, and then someone else memorizes another, then we meet, and I tell you the chapter I memorized, and you tell me the chapter you memorized, because we can get our heads cut off if we have a Bible. And the only part of the Bible I had was Chronicles chapter 17, and this is what I had, was what I taught tonight. I would walk through life believing I don't think we should build temples or churches. Because when it was first brought to God's attention, He poo-pooed the idea. And I don't think humanity got better after David in order to handle having a temple or a church. I think, just based on the first sections of the Bible leading up to Chronicles chapter 17, what I have learned is this. It is best to do what God says the first time and not go back and ask Him about the same thing again. Now, can we build a temple? Okay, well, how about now? Hey, have you given any thought to us building a temple? It's so funny. I was thinking, God, maybe we should build a temple. God, I had a dream the other night where you came to me and told me to build a temple. Is that you? Seriously. He told us if we keep bugging Him, He's going to say yes. Remember the widow and the judge thing? Maybe sometimes it's just simply better to ask God, do you think this is a good idea? And He says no, drop it. What would life look like now had there never been a temple? I'll give you a hint. There wouldn't be a church. A church is the great-great-great-grandchild of the temple. And what do we have with the church? We have an expression of human personality and intellect that's subject to the opinion of other human personalities and intellect. There's a big difference between which house, which living room I'm going to feel more comfortable in than which church I go to. There's a huge difference. And we would see a huge difference in Christianity. Because the one thing that happens when you have church in a living room is you train believers to think church happens in a living room. And if it happens in a living room, it spills out into the front yard. And then when you go down the street to Starbucks, you're still talking, it moves to Starbucks. Home churches train Christians that God is everywhere. And it makes sense to talk about Him everywhere. And it makes sense to worship Him everywhere. And it makes sense to crack open a Bible anywhere. And my favorite, that spills into evangelism smoothly. Smoothly. Church buildings teach Christians something completely different in of themselves. They teach Christians throughout history. We were talking about it today, because today is the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, and we were talking about that today, that most Jews, most nominal Jews, where I come from, dreaded going to the high holy day services. It's like jury duties, the only ones you didn't get out of. And church teaches people the same thing. It teaches that you go somewhere else to find your God. You go somewhere else to find your God. And Jesus ended all that. He brought God back to the Jews and said, you guys don't have to go to a temple anymore to pray. You can pray when you eat. You can pray in your homes. You don't just go to the temple to do it. The church, as in the buildings, teaches Christians throughout generations that you go somewhere else to get your God on. And there is something mighty and powerful about a lot of people flocking to one place to get their God on. I'm not negating that. But there are the people that are sincere. Then there are the people that are doing it because it's tradition. Where you're going to have that everywhere. Let me tell you what you don't have in a living room is tradition. You'll never see it in a home church. Never see it. No way. The one thing every single person who sits in a church fears more than anything is the person speaking, walking right up to them and taking that pause. We watch all these law shows, and when the lawyer walks up and says, well, let me ask you a question, and thinks about it for a moment, we know it's going to be good. Where do you think they learned that from? This is a tried and true method of preaching. Nobody wants to be this close to a preacher if they're there just because of tradition. Ain't gonna happen. In fact, you can destroy the negative spirit of tradition, not traditions. Because traditions, like hymns and spirituals, can be very, very powerful in moving people to take God more serious. But traditionalism is like religion, and you can end traditionalism and end religion by moving God's people out of the building. Because there's something about the building that makes the traditionalists and the religious feel like they're going to be okay staying exactly where they're at. And staying exactly where we're at is stagnant, and stagnant is contrary to the very nature of God and what He's doing in His house, Jesus, and in His house, Jesus' people. You give me 10,000 people who are on fire for Jesus, which is what I found in my first church. I'm good in a building, and you'll never hear me say the building's the problem. But even in that environment, I watched over decades the people change, the church change, and the perspective of getting people in, getting people out, and the lack of ministry change. I saw so much change where, again, you can only fit so much people in the house, and you're not going to get people there who really don't want to be there. That's just not going to happen. You'll get them there 1 or 2 times, but you will not get them there for a lifetime. You will never see someone who goes to church their entire life and never gets saved because they never once think that it applies to them happen in a home church environment. You'll never see it happen. You'll only see it in environments where people can sit in the back and never talk to anyone, never get noticed, never have accountability, and think because they brought their bodies into a pious environment, it must be saving them. And this is what God was trying to avoid. He was saying, no, the temple is for you guys to sit on your lazy butts. No. I'm doing the work here. And I don't need a building because I'm content going from tent to tent. I love that. I'm a mover. I'm a mover and a shaker, thus saith the Lord. I don't sit still. Don't sit me on your pulpit. Don't make me get stuck in your building. I'll visit once in a while, but I got to be out and about, man. I'm God. I got to work in the minds and hearts of men and women for all eternity. I can't be boxed in. So don't bother building me a building when I'm building you a house for all eternity. What a difference. What a neat God. I have to tell you, I always go back to when I read this stuff going, he's kind of nice. That was kind of a nice sentiment. He says, very thoughtful that you want to give me a house. I won't be there. I won't be there. I'm going to be out and about where I'm needed. What an amazing thing to say back. In fact, I'm building you a house. Don't bother. Don't bother. Don't bother. Jesus is God's house, and God's building God's house in our hearts and minds and in our lives. And Jesus told us all the things we're supposed to do with that. And never once does He ever mention build something. In fact, wasn't there a tower problem? Did God say, I don't want you guys building a tower at some point? Didn't that create a problem for all mankind almost as bad as the fall? Seriously. Next to the fall, next to the flood, Babel. Creating Babel. Making it where we can't understand each other forever. That's all. That's all we got for building something. When do we learn? When do we learn to stop building? I don't know. I thought we would have learned at the Golden Calf, but it's not. I want a big church with stained glass. I don't know. I don't know. God's like a big kid in the sky, and big kids see stained glass. They just want to throw rocks, you know. I don't know. If I were God, that's the first thing I would do is kick in all the stained glass. It's pretty. Stained glass is pretty. But it just reeks of, be careful. Be careful. Be careful. Don't touch. Don't touch. I don't know. I can't be the only one who gets motivated by the plate is hot to touch. I can't be the only person on the face of the earth when every time I've ever done it, the server always goes, well, there's always one. Why? I wasn't the one yesterday or the day before, but someone always sees this fragile, perfect, and it just bothers them. It's like, God, that's terrible. Because outside, you're all polished and clean, and inside you're rotting corpses. God, it sounds like something Jesus said once. My understanding of the entirety of the Bible, Old and New Testament, is that every time humans build things, division and devastation occur. Period. For every good step of progress, Satan now has new tools to work with. And I can't think of an example that that doesn't apply to. And all I know is Christians don't get along. Christians don't see eye to eye, and Christians just can't stand being around with Christians not like themselves. Imagine being me and feeling like that. There's nobody like me. Very lonely. Very lonely. Very lonely. I've thought about my life for the last 29 years, and I would definitely say it's been very lonely being me. And when I first became a Christian, and I tried to act like everyone and fit in, I had a zillion friends. But sooner or later, we find out that, we're just a product of Henry Higgins, and our true street language comes out, and everyone finds out we're really not all that fair after all, and they find out who we really are, and then all of a sudden we're different. And if you're different in Christianity, you're a threat. You're a threat to traditionalism, and you're a threat to religion. Because if you have a great relationship with God, I'm no threat. I'm no threat. I'm a nuisance. I'm a nuisance. I'm serious. I mean, like, who cares? I've said this my whole ministry. I said, if you were as busy as me doing things for the Lord, you wouldn't even give me a second thought. Because I see all the other jerks running around, and I'm like, well, yeah, they're jerks. And if you ask me, I'll tell you, but am I going to make it my platform? No. My gosh, I could. Thinking about it. Thinking about it. I'm reading this book, and there's a chapter on Christianity today and what it's like walking into churches now in America. And the woman who wrote the book had the good fortune of going to Joel Osteen's church. Am I saying his name right? Osteen. I never say his name right. Osteen. Joel Osteen's church. Right after his wife was acquitted for the charges of abusing a flight attendant. And if you guys don't know that story, that's a priceless story. It's one of my favorites. Do you guys know the story? Say no. Okay. Oh. Purportedly, she was on an airlines, and I guess she wanted another bag of nuts or something, and she didn't get what she wanted, and the flight attendant, told her that she had to back down and behave, and she went off on the flight attendant, and ended up getting arrested and escorted off the plane, and the flight attendant sued her for damages. I'm not kidding. For hemorrhoids, from stress, and for screwing up her faith. Because she admired this woman as a Christian, and because of her negative behavior, it screwed up her faith. It's an amazing story. It's amazing. Amazing. It's amazing. And she, Osteen's wife won this victory, and the woman who wrote this book happened to be at their church the following church service after winning the victory, when they made the whole church a meeting about, if you team up against God's people, bad things happen to you, and if you don't, and stuff. And her account of her entire church experience, well, look who the audience is. I mean, I ate it like candy. I mean, I was like, wow. She said things like, you know, these people are treating God, and I want to make sure I remembered this, as their personal assistant. Go get me this, go get me this, go get me this. I love that. I love that. And they're feeding their people spiritual cotton candy. Those are my two favorite phrases of the day. Personal assistant and cotton candy. I was like, wow. You know, that basically they're saying if you believe hard enough, nothing bad's going to happen to you. For the record, this story, whoever wins this story, makes everybody look stupid. There's just not a win. There's not a win here. A win is a testimony that glorifies God because of the inner workings of a man, or in this case, woman's character. People praising her character in a bad situation, and her pointing it to Jesus is what we call a victory. Not because, you know, she didn't have to write a check. Who cares? A terrible story. Funny. I hope they make a TV movie out of it. But, she described what it looked like walking into this church. She said there's no way to know that it's a church ever. There's no way to know that it's a church. She said that when you walk in, it's in an industrial area, there's no signage. There's no signage. You walk in, it's an industrial area, you have no idea where you're going. You walk into a building, and instead of seeing what would look anything like a church, like maybe a cross or a baptismal or hymnals, you know what I'm saying? Or a scripture or something. She said that you walk in and it's a television studio. And that there's just no indication, and there's never an indication from start to finish that you're in a church. That the songs all say things like, you know, we believe and therefore we have, and nothing. She said the entire time she was there was no mention of the violent and dark aspects of the gospel. There's no mention of death and crucifixion. No mention of sin or hell. And that it was just a positive, you know, hour of church that had no church in it. And that they never said, if you submit your life to God, if you receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior, that all that stuff was left to, if you believe, you get what you believe. If you believe you're right, it may take a while, but God will remind everyone else that you're right. But sometimes you need to remind Him that you're right. And you got to remind Him of His promises. And they even sang a song that said, remember your promises, God. Now, this is me saying, I would not want to say the wrong thing to God. That would scare me. I find ordering God around a little spooky, and I find teaching His people that you're only as blessed as you believe you are to be totally destructive doctrine. You cram a dozen people into a living room, you will never see anything like that. You will never see anything like that. Which is really funny because you come into this living room, you got the lights, you got the camera. You know, I don't see a cross. There is a Bible, but this isn't my house, by the way. Then again, if this were, well, there's a cross. I can see a cross, but you can't. But it's a big-ass cross. But, you know, it's funny because you walk into my house. I mean, notice we're not filming there. It's like the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland. You know? I even just got black lights. I found them cheap at a thrift store for Halloween. So, yeah. But it's the people, and it's what's being taught. It's what's being sung. It's what's being preached. You know, if I ever build a church building, I don't think we're going to see too many crosses at my church building. And, you know, I don't think that would be my thing. Like I said, it would probably be more like a burlesque theater or something like that, you know, or a circus. But Again, the accountability of a non-structure and a non-orthodox church environment speaks to the authenticity of what's really being served. And it's impossible to get that mass hysteria, that mass acceptance of goo-goo muck like we see in the positive thinking churches today. But again, all the way back in the beginning, someone said to God, "What do you think of this idea?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't think that'll be good. I think we should concentrate on, instead of you building God's house, I'll build God's house. I will build the house that you could dwell in forever, and it's going to be perfect. Instead of you building me an imperfect house that I'm barely even going to be there." Think about it. Thank you very much.